Question 1. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a new, high-value supplier for applied materials has provided assurances regarding its adherence to all relevant environmental and labor regulations. However, internal sales projections show a significant increase in revenue if this supplier is onboarded quickly. What is the most appropriate approach for applied materials to take? Option A. Proceed with the contract based on the supplier's assurances and the potential for immediate revenue growth, deferring detailed checks until after the contract is signed. Option B. Delegate the entire due diligence process to the sales team responsible for securing the contract, trusting their judgment on the supplier's reliability. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive, independent due diligence investigation into the supplier's regulatory compliance and ethical practices before finalizing any contract. Option D. Perform a cursory review of publicly available information and the supplier's self-attested compliance statements to expedite the onboarding process. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive, independent due diligence investigation into the supplier's regulatory compliance and ethical practices before finalizing any contract. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Applied Materials to balance its commitment to ethical business practices and regulatory compliance with the potential for significant financial gain. The pressure to secure a large contract could lead to overlooking or downplaying potential risks associated with a new supplier. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of business opportunities does not compromise the integrity of Applied Materials operations or its adherence to applicable regulations. The correct approach involves conducting a thorough and independent due diligence investigation into the proposed supplier's compliance history, ethical standards, and financial stability. This proactive measure is crucial for identifying and mitigating potential risks before entering into a significant contractual agreement. This aligns with general principles of corporate responsibility and risk management, which are often codified in various regulatory frameworks that mandate reasonable steps to prevent engaging with entities that may pose legal, ethical, or reputational risks. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to know your customer and know your supplier principles, which are fundamental to preventing involvement in illicit activities or association with non-compliant entities. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the contract based solely on the supplier's assurances and the potential for immediate profit. This fails to acknowledge the regulatory and ethical imperative to verify such claims and conduct independent risk assessments. Such a failure could expose Applied Materials to significant legal liabilities, reputational damage, and potential sanctions if the supplier is later found to be non-compliant or engaged in unethical practices. Another incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire due diligence process to the sales team, who may have a vested interest in closing the deal. While sales teams play a role in identifying potential partners, they are not typically equipped or incentivized to conduct the rigorous, independent risk assessments required for significant contractual relationships. This delegation bypasses established internal controls and increases the likelihood of overlooking critical red flags. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on outdated or superficial background checks. Regulatory expectations and the complexity of global supply chains necessitate ongoing and comprehensive due diligence. Relying on minimal or expired information is insufficient to identify current risks and demonstrates a lack of commitment to robust compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This framework should include clear policies and procedures for supplier vetting, independent verification of supplier claims, and escalation protocols for identified risks. Professionals should prioritize regulatory compliance and ethical considerations over short-term financial gains, understanding that long-term sustainability is built on a foundation of integrity and responsible business conduct. Question 2. Compliance review shows that a recent internal audit at Applied Materials identified a potential discrepancy in the reporting of certain revenue recognition details. While the current internal policy does not explicitly prohibit the method used, it is unclear if this method fully aligns with the latest SEC guidance on revenue recognition for complex manufacturing contracts. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Applied Materials compliance team? Option A. Immediately halt the current reporting method and seek clarification from the SEC on the interpretation of the revenue recognition guidance. Option B. Conduct a thorough internal review to assess the discrepancy against SEC regulations and guidance, consulting with legal counsel if necessary, to ensure accurate and compliant reporting before any further filings. Option C. Amend the internal policy to explicitly permit the current reporting method, assuming it is not overtly illegal, and then proceed with reporting. Option D. Proceed with the current reporting method as it does not violate any explicit internal policy and is consistent with past practices. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the current reporting method as it does not violate any explicit internal policy and is consistent with past practices. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires applied materials compliance officers to navigate potential conflicts between internal company policies and external regulatory requirements, specifically within the context of the U.S. regulatory framework governing financial reporting and disclosure. The core challenge lies in ensuring that all disclosures are not only accurate but also timely and complete, as mandated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. A failure to do so can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and financial penalties. Careful judgment is required to interpret the nuances of these regulations and apply them to the specific operational realities of applied materials. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented review process that prioritizes adherence to SEC regulations. This means proactively identifying any potential misstatements or omissions, even if they appear minor, and ensuring they are corrected in accordance with Sarbanes-Oxley Act, SOX, provisions and SEC disclosure rules. This approach is right because it directly addresses the legal and ethical obligations of a publicly traded company to provide transparent and accurate financial information to investors. It demonstrates a commitment to good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, minimizing the risk of enforcement actions. An approach that relies solely on the absence of explicit internal policy violations is incorrect because it fails to recognize that internal policies are often designed to meet or exceed minimum regulatory standards. If an action, while not explicitly forbidden by internal policy, violates SEC regulations, it is still a serious compliance failure. This approach demonstrates a lack of proactive risk assessment and a reactive stance to compliance, which is insufficient for a company like Applied Materials operating under stringent U.S. securities laws. An approach that prioritizes speed of reporting over accuracy and completeness is also incorrect. While timeliness is important for disclosures, it is secondary to the requirement for accuracy and completeness. The SEC's rules, particularly those related to Form 10-K and 10-Q filings, emphasize the need for disclosures to be free from material misstatement. Rushing to file without ensuring these standards are met can lead to the very misstatements the regulations aim to prevent. Finally, an approach that seeks to interpret regulations in the most favorable light for the company, without a robust basis in established SEC guidance or legal precedent, is professionally unsound. This can be seen as an attempt to circumvent compliance rather than adhere to it. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a commitment to understanding the spirit and intent of the regulations, consulting with legal counsel when necessary, and erring on the side of caution when interpreting ambiguous areas, always with the goal of protecting investors and maintaining market integrity. Question 3. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a key customer, a large semiconductor manufacturer, has requested access to specific operational data from Applied Materials related to the performance of equipment supplied to them. The customer states this data is crucial for their internal process optimization efforts. The sales team is eager to provide the data to maintain a strong customer relationship. What is the most appropriate initial step for Applied Materials' internal team to take in response to this request? Option A. Forward the request directly to the sales department for them to handle the response and data provision. Option B. Immediately agree to provide all operational data requested by the customer to foster goodwill and strengthen the business relationship. Option C. Conduct a thorough internal review to identify the specific data requested, assess its sensitivity, and determine if its disclosure would violate any applicable data privacy regulations. Option D. Politely decline the request, citing general data privacy concerns without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough internal review to identify the specific data requested, assess its sensitivity, and determine if its disclosure would violate any applicable data privacy regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Applied Materials compliance team to navigate potentially conflicting stakeholder interests while adhering strictly to the specified regulatory framework. The pressure to respond quickly to a significant customer's request must be balanced against the imperative to maintain data privacy and security, as mandated by the relevant regulations. A misstep could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of customer trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any response is both compliant and strategically sound. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough internal review to identify the specific data requested, assess its sensitivity, and determine if its disclosure would violate any data privacy regulations applicable to Applied Materials. This approach is correct because it prioritizes regulatory compliance and data protection. It acknowledges the need to understand the scope and nature of the data before making any commitments. This aligns with principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that only necessary and permissible data is shared, thereby safeguarding against potential breaches and regulatory violations. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that immediately agrees to provide all requested data without internal review is incorrect because it bypasses essential compliance checks. This could lead to the inadvertent disclosure of sensitive or proprietary information, violating data privacy laws and potentially breaching contractual obligations. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for regulatory requirements. An approach that refuses to provide any data, citing general privacy concerns without a specific assessment, is also incorrect. While caution is warranted, an outright refusal without understanding the specific request and its potential for compliant disclosure can damage customer relationships and may not be in line with the company's operational needs or contractual agreements. It fails to explore potential avenues for compliant data sharing. An approach that delegates the decision solely to the sales team without involving the compliance department is incorrect. Sales teams are primarily focused on customer relationships and revenue, and may not possess the necessary expertise to interpret and apply complex data privacy regulations. This delegation risks overlooking critical compliance requirements and exposes Applied Materials to significant regulatory and legal risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, they must clearly identify the regulatory framework governing the situation. Second, they should gather all relevant information about the request, including its purpose and scope. Third, they should conduct a risk assessment, evaluating potential compliance issues and business impacts. Fourth, they should consult with relevant internal departments, such as legal and compliance, to ensure all regulatory obligations are met. Finally, they should document their decision-making process and the rationale behind their chosen course of action. Question 4. Operational review demonstrates that a team at Applied Materials has identified a significant technological breakthrough that could provide a substantial competitive advantage. This breakthrough is currently considered material non-public information. The team is eager to discuss potential strategic applications and partnerships with external entities to accelerate market entry. What is the most appropriate course of action for the team to take regarding this information? Option A. Proceed with informal discussions with select trusted external partners to gauge interest and explore potential collaborations, assuming confidentiality can be maintained. Option B. Delay any external communication until the technology is fully patented and publicly disclosed, even if this significantly hinders market entry opportunities. Option C. Immediately consult with Applied Materials' legal and compliance departments to understand the regulatory implications and establish a compliant communication strategy before engaging with any external parties. Option D. Share the details of the breakthrough with a broader internal audience within Applied Materials to solicit diverse strategic ideas before seeking external input. The correct answer is C. Immediately consult with Applied Materials' legal and compliance departments to understand the regulatory implications and establish a compliant communication strategy before engaging with any external parties. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Applied Materials employees due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance, particularly concerning the handling of sensitive intellectual property and potential insider trading risks. The need for careful judgment arises from the imperative to balance the company's competitive advantage with its legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy with the legal and compliance departments. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding regulatory frameworks by seeking expert guidance before any action is taken. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of due diligence and adherence to securities laws, which prohibit the misuse of material non-public information. By engaging legal counsel, Applied Materials employees ensure that any disclosure or use of information is conducted within the bounds of the law, preventing potential insider trading violations and safeguarding the company's reputation. This approach prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory integrity above immediate business gains. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with sharing the information without consulting legal or compliance. This directly violates regulations designed to prevent insider trading and the unfair dissemination of material non-public information. Such an action could expose Applied Materials and its employees to severe penalties, including fines and legal action, and damage the company's standing in the market. Another incorrect approach is to delay reporting the discovery or to downplay its significance. This failure to act promptly and transparently can be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent regulatory requirements or to gain an unfair advantage. It undermines the company's internal control mechanisms and its commitment to a culture of compliance. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to share the information with a limited group of trusted colleagues without formal notification to the relevant departments. This creates an environment where material non-public information can spread informally, increasing the risk of accidental disclosure or misuse, and failing to establish a clear audit trail for compliance purposes. Professionals at Applied Materials should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory adherence and ethical conduct. This involves a clear understanding of company policies and relevant laws, a commitment to seeking expert advice when in doubt, and a willingness to report potential issues promptly and transparently. The framework should emphasize a culture of compliance, where employees feel empowered to raise concerns without fear of reprisal, ensuring that business decisions are always made within the established legal and ethical boundaries. Question 5. Operational review demonstrates that Applied Materials is considering implementing a new employee stock purchase plan that offers employees the opportunity to buy company stock at a discount to the market price. The proposed plan includes a vesting period for the options granted. What is the most appropriate approach for Applied Materials to take to ensure compliance with financial reporting regulations and ethical standards? Option A. Implement the plan immediately and expense the discount only when options are exercised by employees. Option B. Conduct a thorough valuation of the stock options to determine their fair value and expense this cost over the vesting period, in compliance with relevant accounting standards and regulatory guidance. Option C. Defer the recognition of any cost associated with the stock purchase plan until the end of the fiscal year, and then assess if any expense is necessary. Option D. Classify the entire discount as a general administrative expense without specific accounting for the equity component. The correct answer is A. Implement the plan immediately and expense the discount only when options are exercised by employees. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Applied Materials due to the potential for conflicts of interest and the need to maintain the integrity of financial reporting. The company must navigate the delicate balance between fostering employee well-being and adhering to strict accounting principles and regulatory disclosure requirements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any employee benefit programs do not inadvertently create misrepresentations or obscure the true financial health of the company. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed employee stock purchase plan by Applied Materials' internal legal and accounting teams, in consultation with external auditors. This approach is best professional practice because it ensures compliance with relevant accounting standards, such as ASC 718 for stock-based compensation in the U.S. and securities regulations. Specifically, it mandates that the fair value of the stock options granted under the plan be accurately determined and expensed over the vesting period. This provides transparent and reliable financial reporting to investors and stakeholders, upholding the principles of accuracy and fairness in financial disclosures. An incorrect approach would be to implement the employee stock purchase plan without a rigorous valuation of the stock options and without considering the accounting implications. This would be a regulatory failure because it violates accounting standards that require the recognition of the cost of stock-based compensation. It also poses an ethical failure by potentially misleading investors about the true cost of employee compensation and the company's profitability. Another incorrect approach would be to classify the stock purchase plan as a simple payroll expense without proper accounting treatment for the equity component. This is a regulatory failure as it misrepresents the nature of the compensation and fails to comply with the specific accounting guidance for equity awards. Ethically, it undermines the principle of transparency in financial reporting. A third incorrect approach would be to delay or omit the expensing of the stock options until they are exercised, or to use an overly simplistic valuation method that does not reflect the true economic value of the options. This is a regulatory failure because it contravenes the principle of recognizing expenses as incurred and the fair value measurement requirements. It is also an ethical failure as it artificially inflates reported profits and misleads stakeholders about the company's financial performance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a proactive engagement of legal, accounting, and compliance departments at the earliest stages of program design. A robust internal control framework should be in place to ensure that all financial transactions and reporting adhere to applicable regulations and accounting principles. When in doubt, seeking guidance from external experts, such as auditors and legal counsel specializing in corporate finance and securities law, is crucial. Question 6. System analysis indicates that an applied materials engineer is developing a personal project that could significantly benefit from insights derived from internal research and development data. The engineer believes this data, while not publicly disclosed, is crucial for the project's success and is considering incorporating it. What is the most appropriate course of action for the engineer to ethically and legally proceed? Option A. Seek explicit written authorization from Applied Materials before using any proprietary information for the personal project. Option B. Utilize the proprietary information for the personal project, assuming it is acceptable as long as it is not directly sold or published. Option C. Share the proprietary information with trusted external colleagues for their input on the personal project. Option D. Assume the proprietary information is no longer confidential if it has been developed over a year ago and proceed with its use. The correct answer is A. Seek explicit, written authorization from Applied Materials before using any proprietary information for the personal project. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Applied Materials employee regarding the ethical and regulatory implications of using proprietary information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's need to protect its intellectual property with the employee's personal or professional development goals. Misjudging the boundaries of acceptable information use can lead to severe consequences, including legal action, reputational damage, and termination of employment. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between general industry knowledge and specific, confidential applied materials data. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves seeking explicit, written authorization from Applied Materials before using any proprietary information for personal projects or external publications. This aligns with the company's intellectual property policies and relevant trade secret laws. By obtaining written consent, the employee demonstrates adherence to ethical standards and legal obligations, ensuring that the use of information is sanctioned and does not infringe upon Applied Materials rights. This proactive step mitigates risks and fosters a culture of compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using proprietary information for personal projects without authorization is a direct violation of company policy and potentially trade secret laws. This approach disregards the confidential nature of the data and the company's ownership of its intellectual property. Sharing proprietary information with external parties, even for seemingly benign purposes like seeking advice, constitutes a breach of confidentiality. This exposes Applied Materials to competitive disadvantage and potential loss of trade secrets, violating non-disclosure agreements and ethical duties. Assuming that information is no longer proprietary after a certain period without explicit confirmation from Applied Materials is a risky assumption. Trade secrets can remain protected indefinitely as long as they are actively maintained as confidential. This approach fails to acknowledge the ongoing responsibility to protect company assets. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Applied Materials should adopt a framework of seek first to understand, then to be understood, when dealing with proprietary information. This involves thoroughly reviewing company policies on intellectual property, confidentiality, and data usage. When in doubt, the default professional action is to err on the side of caution and seek clarification or explicit permission from the appropriate internal channels, such as legal or management. This proactive and transparent approach ensures compliance, protects the company's interests, and maintains personal and professional integrity. Question 7. The audit findings indicate a potential unauthorized access to sensitive customer data within Applied Materials systems. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action to address this situation, considering regulatory compliance and stakeholder trust? Option A. Initiate a thorough internal investigation to determine the scope and nature of the access. Consult with legal and compliance teams to understand notification obligation, and implement immediate security enhancements to prevent further unauthorized access, followed by timely notification to affected parties and regulators as required. Option B. Immediately implement broad system access restrictions for all employees to prevent any further potential breaches, while deferring a detailed investigation until the immediate security concerns are fully addressed. Option C. Publicly acknowledge a minor system anomaly without detailing the nature of the data or potential impact, to avoid causing undue alarm among customers and stakeholders. Option D. Inform senior management of the potential issue and await their directive on how to proceed, prioritizing the protection of the company's reputation above all else. Correct answer is A. Initiate a thorough internal investigation to determine the scope and nature of the access. Consult with legal and compliance teams to understand notification obligations, and implement immediate security enhancements to prevent further unauthorized access, followed by timely notification to affected parties and regulators as required. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires navigating potential conflicts between internal company policies, regulatory expectations, and ethical conduct, particularly concerning data privacy and security. Applied Materials, as a global technology company, operates under stringent data protection regulations. The audit findings highlight a critical need for a robust response that prioritizes compliance and stakeholder trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any corrective actions taken are not only effective in addressing the immediate issue, but also sustainable and compliant with all applicable laws and internal guidelines. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and transparent investigation, adhering strictly to the established data privacy and security protocols of Applied Materials and relevant regulatory frameworks. This approach prioritizes identifying the root cause of the data exposure, assessing the extent of the breach, and implementing immediate containment and remediation measures. Crucially, it necessitates timely and appropriate notification to affected parties and regulatory bodies as mandated by law, while also focusing on strengthening internal controls to prevent recurrence. This aligns with regulatory requirements such as those found in data protection laws that mandate breach notification and data security standards, as well as ethical obligations to protect sensitive information and maintain stakeholder confidence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on internal damage control without proper regulatory engagement would fail to meet legal obligations. This could lead to significant fines, legal repercussions, and severe reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves downplaying the severity of the incident or delaying notification would violate transparency principles and potentially breach specific notification timelines stipulated by regulations, demonstrating a lack of ethical responsibility and a disregard for due diligence. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing superficial fixes without a thorough root cause analysis risks the issue recurring, indicating a failure to uphold the duty of care and a lack of commitment to robust data security practices. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making framework. This involves 1. Understanding the scope and potential impact of the issue by consulting internal experts and relevant documentation. 2. Identifying all applicable regulatory requirements and internal policies. 3. Evaluating potential response strategies against these requirements and policies, considering both immediate and long-term consequences. 4. Prioritizing actions that ensure compliance, protect stakeholders, and uphold ethical standards. 5. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made for accountability and future reference. Question 8. Operational review demonstrates that Applied Materials is collecting extensive operational data that includes employee and customer identifiers. To improve efficiency and identify performance bottlenecks, this data is being considered for direct analysis by various departments. What is the most appropriate approach for Applied Materials to take regarding the use of this data for operational review, ensuring compliance with data privacy regulations? Option A. Obtain explicit granular consent from every individual whose data is included in the operational review before any analysis begins. Option B. Implement robust anonymization or pseudonymization techniques on the data before it is accessed or analyzed by departmental teams. Option C. Rely on existing general IT security measures to protect the data, without specific anonymization or pseudonymization steps, as the data is only for internal use. Option D. Proceed with the analysis using the raw data, assuming that internal operational reviews are exempt from strict data privacy regulations. The correct answer is B. Implement robust anonymization or pseudonymization techniques on the data before it is accessed or analyzed by departmental teams. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Applied Materials due to the inherent tension between the need for efficient data processing and the stringent requirements of data privacy regulations. The challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency with legal compliance and ethical data handling. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any data processing activities undertaken by Applied Materials do not inadvertently violate the privacy rights of individuals or contravene applicable data protection laws. The correct approach involves implementing robust data anonymization and pseudonymization techniques before any data is used for operational review or analytics. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and privacy by design, which are central to many data protection frameworks. Specifically, anonymization renders personal data irreversibly unidentifiable, thereby removing it from the scope of many data protection regulations. Pseudonymization, while allowing for re-identification under certain controlled circumstances, significantly reduces the risk of unauthorized access to personal data and is often considered a strong security measure. This approach ensures that Applied Materials can gain insights from its operational data without compromising the privacy of individuals, thereby adhering to regulatory obligations and maintaining trust. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the operational review using raw, identifiable personal data without any protective measures. This directly contravenes data protection principles that mandate the processing of personal data only for specified, legitimate purposes and with appropriate safeguards. Such an action would expose Applied Materials to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and potential legal action from affected individuals. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that internal use of data automatically exempts Applied Materials from data protection obligations. Regulations typically apply to the processing of personal data, regardless of whether it is for internal analysis or external sharing. Failing to apply appropriate safeguards internally is a common pitfall that can lead to breaches of privacy. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on vague assurances of data security without implementing specific, verifiable anonymization or pseudonymization techniques. Data protection laws often require demonstrable compliance, not just a general belief in security. Without concrete measures, the data remains vulnerable and the company remains non-compliant. Professionals at Applied Materials should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of applicable data protection laws, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, depending on the operational jurisdiction. This framework should involve a risk assessment of data processing activities, followed by the selection and implementation of appropriate technical and organizational measures to mitigate identified risks. Regular training for personnel involved in data handling and periodic audits of data processing practices are also crucial components of a robust compliance program. The guiding principle should always be to process personal data in a manner that is lawful, fair, transparent, and minimizes privacy risks. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal a minor but persistent deviation in a component's performance metrics during routine testing at Applied Materials, which, if left unaddressed, could theoretically impact long-term reliability under extreme operating conditions. What is the most appropriate course of action for the responsible engineer? Option A. Attempt to adjust the testing parameters slightly to bring the component's performance within the acceptable range, assuming the deviation is within acceptable statistical noise. Option B. Ignore the deviation, as it is minor and unlikely to cause immediate failure, and focus on more critical production issues. Option C. Immediately report the deviation to the relevant external regulatory agency without informing internal management or quality assurance. Option D. Document the deviation thoroughly, assess its potential impact, and escalate the issue through Applied Materials' established internal reporting channels for quality assurance review and resolution. The correct answer is D. Document the deviation thoroughly, assess its potential impact, and escalate the issue through Applied Materials' established internal reporting channels for quality assurance review and resolution. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Applied Materials employees to navigate potential conflicts between internal company policies, industry best practices, and the specific regulatory framework governing their operations. The challenge lies in ensuring that quality control processes not only meet internal standards, but also comply with external legal and ethical obligations, especially when discrepancies arise that could impact product integrity or customer trust. A failure to adhere to the correct approach could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and compromised product safety. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented escalation of the quality control issue. This begins with thoroughly investigating the discrepancy to understand its root cause and potential impact. Following this, the issue must be formally reported through established internal channels, such as the Quality Assurance Department or a designated compliance officer. This ensures transparency and allows for appropriate oversight and decision-making by those with the authority and expertise to address the problem. This approach aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which mandate that companies have robust systems for identifying, reporting, and rectifying quality defects. Specifically, it reflects the spirit of regulations that require companies to maintain high standards of product quality and to act with integrity in their business dealings. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to attempt to resolve the discrepancy informally without proper documentation or escalation. This bypasses established quality control protocols and can lead to the issue being overlooked or inadequately addressed, potentially violating regulatory requirements for product integrity and safety. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the discrepancy altogether, assuming it is minor or will resolve itself. This is a direct contravention of ethical obligations and regulatory mandates that require proactive identification and mitigation of risks associated with product quality. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential consequences for Applied Materials and its customers. A third incorrect approach is to immediately report the issue externally to regulatory bodies, without first attempting to resolve it internally through established channels. While transparency is important, premature external reporting can undermine internal processes, damage company reputation unnecessarily, and may not be the most efficient way to achieve resolution, potentially violating internal reporting policies and demonstrating a lack of trust in the company's own corrective action mechanisms. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Applied Materials should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established procedures and regulatory compliance. When faced with a quality control discrepancy, the first step is always to gather all relevant facts and assess the potential impact. This should be followed by consulting internal policies and procedures for reporting and resolving such issues. If the discrepancy falls within the scope of specific regulations, those regulations must be consulted to ensure the chosen course of action is compliant. Escalation through designated internal channels is crucial for accountability and effective problem solving. This systematic approach ensures that issues are addressed comprehensively, ethically, and in accordance with all applicable laws and guidelines, thereby protecting the company, its customers, and its reputation. Question 10. Upon reviewing a candidate's questions during an interview for a senior engineering role at Applied Materials, the candidate asks about the company's specific plans for next-generation semiconductor manufacturing equipment and how these plans might impact the competitive landscape in the next 3 to 5 years. The interviewer has access to detailed, non-public strategic roadmaps and financial projections related to these future products. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional ethics for applied materials? Option A. Provide the candidate with a high-level overview of the company's strategic roadmap for new equipment, including estimated timelines and potential market share gains, as this information is crucial for the candidate to assess their fit. Option B. Discuss general industry trends in semiconductor manufacturing and applied materials' known commitment to innovation in the sector, without disclosing specific product roadmaps or financial projections. Option C. Speculate on potential future product performance and market impact based on current industry knowledge, emphasizing that these are personal opinions. Option D. State that such information is confidential and cannot be discussed, offering no further context or alternative information to the candidate. Correct answer is B. Discuss general industry trends in semiconductor manufacturing and applied materials' known commitment to innovation in the sector, without disclosing specific product roadmaps or financial projections. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the ethical and regulatory landscape surrounding the disclosure of potentially sensitive information within a hiring context. Applied Materials, as a publicly traded company, is subject to various regulations designed to ensure fair and transparent dealings with stakeholders, including potential employees. The challenge lies in balancing the need to provide accurate information to a candidate with the obligation to protect proprietary or non-public information. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation, insider trading concerns, or the premature disclosure of material information that could impact the market. The correct approach involves a commitment to transparency within the bounds of regulatory compliance. This means acknowledging the candidate's inquiry and providing information that is publicly available or generally known within the industry, without revealing any non-public material information about Applied Materials' future plans, financial performance, or strategic initiatives. This approach upholds ethical standards by being truthful and helpful to the candidate, while strictly adhering to securities laws and company policies that prohibit the disclosure of insider information. It demonstrates a professional understanding of the responsibilities associated with handling sensitive corporate data. An incorrect approach that involves speculating or providing estimates about future performance or product roadmaps would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a direct violation of securities regulations, such as those enforced by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, which prohibit the dissemination of material non-public information. Such speculation could lead to accusations of market manipulation or providing an unfair advantage to the candidate. Another incorrect approach, such as outright refusing to answer any questions about the company's direction, even general industry trends, could be seen as unhelpful and potentially misleading by omission, though less severe than disclosing non-public information. However, a complete lack of engagement without offering any permissible information is not the most professional or ethical response. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with inquiries that could touch upon sensitive information, the first step is to identify the nature of the information requested. If the information is public, generally known, or relates to broad industry trends, it can be discussed. If the information is material and non-public, such as specific financial projections, unannounced product details, or strategic merger discussions, it must be avoided. In such cases, the professional should politely decline to answer, citing company policy or the need to protect confidential information, and offer to discuss publicly available information or general aspects of the role and company culture. Question 11. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of a material misstatement in Applied Materials' recent quarterly financial filings due to an accounting error identified by a junior analyst. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the Chief Financial Officer? Option A. Issue a press release acknowledging a potential accounting issue and stating that Applied Materials is investigating, without providing further details. Option B. Engage independent external legal counsel and forensic accountants to conduct an objective investigation into the potential misstatement, reporting directly to the Audit Committee. Option C. Instruct the internal legal team to assess the situation and advise on the necessary disclosures, deferring any external communication until their review is complete. Option D. Immediately instruct the internal audit team to conduct a comprehensive review and prepare a public statement based on their preliminary findings. The correct answer is D. Immediately instruct the internal audit team to conduct a comprehensive review and prepare a public statement based on their preliminary findings. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Applied Materials, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning financial reporting and disclosure. The risk matrix, a common tool for assessing potential threats, highlights a significant risk related to the accuracy and completeness of financial disclosures. The challenge lies in determining the most appropriate and compliant response to a potential misstatement that could impact investor confidence and regulatory standing. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for timely disclosure with the imperative of accuracy and adherence to accounting standards. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation led by the audit committee, engaging independent external counsel and forensic accountants. This ensures that the investigation is conducted without bias and with the necessary expertise to uncover the facts. This approach is professionally sound and ethically mandated because it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of regulations such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act (SOX) in the U.S., which mandates robust internal controls and accurate financial reporting. Engaging independent experts provides an unbiased assessment, crucial for determining the materiality of any misstatement and for informing subsequent disclosure decisions in accordance with SEC reporting requirements. This process also upholds the fiduciary duty owed to shareholders by ensuring transparency and integrity in financial reporting. An incorrect approach would be to immediately issue a press release without a thorough investigation. This is professionally unacceptable because it risks disseminating inaccurate or incomplete information, potentially misleading investors and regulators. It bypasses the critical step of fact-finding and materiality assessment, which is a regulatory requirement. Furthermore, it could be seen as an attempt to preemptively manage public perception without a solid factual basis, which is ethically questionable and could lead to further regulatory scrutiny. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the internal legal team to conduct the investigation and determine the appropriate disclosure. While the internal legal team plays a vital role, their independence and objectivity might be compromised by internal pressures or a lack of specialized forensic accounting expertise. This could lead to an incomplete or biased assessment, failing to meet the rigorous standards expected by regulators and investors for significant financial matters. A third incorrect approach would be to delay any disclosure until the internal audit team completes a full, comprehensive review, even if preliminary findings suggest a material misstatement. This delay, while seemingly aimed at ensuring absolute accuracy, can itself be a violation of disclosure obligations if a material event has occurred that requires prompt reporting to the market. The professional decision-making process should involve a risk-based approach, where the urgency of disclosure is weighed against the need for accuracy, with independent expertise guiding this balance. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making framework. First, identify the nature and potential materiality of the issue. Second, assess the applicable regulatory framework, e.g., SEC rules (SOX). Third, determine the need for independent expertise to ensure objectivity and thoroughness. Fourth, establish a clear communication and reporting line, often involving the audit committee and board of directors. Fifth, proceed with a fact-based investigation and materiality assessment before making any public statements or filings. This systematic approach ensures compliance, protects the company's reputation, and upholds ethical standards. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a potential operational bottleneck in the supply chain for a critical component used in Applied Materials' manufacturing process. To investigate and propose a solution, an employee needs access to detailed production and inventory data that may contain sensitive supplier information. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance and protect proprietary data? Option A. Request the data through the established internal channels, specifically by contacting the legal and compliance departments for guidance on data access protocols and any necessary approvals. Option B. Ask a colleague in the IT department to grant temporary access to the relevant databases, explaining the urgency of the situation. Option C. Proceed with a general search of publicly available information and internal reports, assuming the necessary details will be found without direct access to sensitive production and inventory data. Option D. Access the data directly from the system, as the need is urgent and the employee believes they can identify the relevant information quickly. The correct answer is D. Access the data directly from the system, as the need is urgent and the employee believes they can identify the relevant information quickly. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Applied Materials to balance the immediate need for information with the stringent requirements of regulatory compliance and data privacy. The core tension lies between operational efficiency and the legal obligations to protect sensitive information. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any information gathering adheres strictly to established protocols and legal boundaries, preventing potential breaches or misuse of data. The correct approach involves proactively seeking guidance from the legal and compliance departments before proceeding with any data access. This represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of regulatory adherence and ethical data handling. Specifically, it demonstrates a commitment to understanding and respecting the established legal framework governing data access and usage within Applied Materials, which is likely dictated by regulations such as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, or similar data protection laws depending on the specific jurisdiction of the assessment. By engaging legal and compliance, the individual ensures that any data access is authorized, necessary for the stated purpose, and conducted in a manner that safeguards privacy and prevents unauthorized disclosure. This proactive step mitigates legal risks and upholds the company's commitment to responsible data stewardship. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to access the data directly without authorization, even with the intention of resolving the issue quickly. This failure stems from a disregard for established internal policies and external regulations designed to protect sensitive information. Such an action could lead to violations of data privacy laws, resulting in significant fines and reputational damage for Applied Materials. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on informal channels or colleagues for access without proper documentation or approval. This bypasses the necessary oversight mechanisms and creates a significant compliance risk, as it lacks accountability and can lead to unauthorized data proliferation or misuse. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that the information is readily available and proceed with accessing it based on a perceived need, without verifying the legitimacy of that need or the authorization to access the data. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to appreciate the critical importance of data governance and security protocols. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adhering to regulatory requirements and internal policies. This involves a clear process of identifying potential risks, consulting relevant subject matter experts, such as legal and compliance, documenting all actions and decisions, and ensuring that any data handling is conducted with the utmost integrity and in full compliance with applicable laws and company guidelines. When faced with ambiguity or a perceived need that might involve sensitive data, the default action should always be to seek clarification and authorization through the proper channels. Question 13. Examination of the data shows that Applied Materials is developing a novel process for semiconductor manufacturing that utilizes a new class of chemical compounds. The research and development team is eager to accelerate the deployment of this process to gain a competitive edge. Which of the following represents the most prudent and compliant approach for Applied Materials? Option A. Proceed with the development and pilot testing of the new process, assuming that existing environmental and safety protocols are sufficient, and address any specific regulatory concerns that arise during later stages of commercialization. Option B. Rely on the technical expertise of the R&D team to ensure compliance, as they are most familiar with the chemical compounds and process, and only engage legal and compliance departments if significant issues are flagged by external parties. Option C. Immediately halt all development and seek comprehensive legal and regulatory counsel to identify all applicable national and international regulations, industry standards, and potential environmental impact assessments required for the new chemical compounds and manufacturing process before proceeding further. Option D. Initiate a limited pilot program in a controlled environment and gather preliminary data on the process's efficiency and potential risks, deferring a full regulatory review until the technology is proven and a business case is firmly established. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the development and pilot testing of the new process, assuming that existing environmental and safety protocols are sufficient, and address any specific regulatory concerns that arise during later stages of commercialization. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to innovate and the imperative to adhere to stringent regulatory frameworks governing the development and deployment of new technologies. Applied Materials, as a leader in the semiconductor industry, must navigate complex compliance landscapes that prioritize safety, data integrity, and fair market practices. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of competitive advantage through novel solutions with the absolute necessity of regulatory adherence, ensuring that innovation does not outpace or compromise established legal and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to identify potential regulatory pitfalls before they manifest as compliance failures. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough regulatory review process. This means engaging with legal and compliance teams early in the development lifecycle to identify all applicable regulations, guidelines, and industry standards relevant to the new technology. This includes understanding data privacy laws, intellectual property rights, environmental regulations, and any sector-specific compliance requirements that Applied Materials must meet. By systematically assessing the proposed innovation against these frameworks, the company can identify potential areas of non-compliance and implement necessary modifications or safeguards before significant resources are committed or public disclosure occurs. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible innovation and demonstrates a commitment to ethical business conduct, minimizing legal risks and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with development without a comprehensive regulatory assessment, assuming that existing general compliance measures are sufficient. This failure to conduct a specific review for the new technology risks overlooking unique regulatory obligations, leading to potential violations. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed to market over regulatory due diligence, believing that compliance issues can be addressed retroactively. This is a dangerous strategy that can result in significant penalties, product recalls, or even legal injunctions, undermining the very market advantage the company sought to achieve. Finally, relying solely on the technical team's understanding of compliance, without involving dedicated legal and compliance experts, is also an inadequate approach. Technical teams may not possess the nuanced understanding of legal interpretations and evolving regulatory landscapes necessary for robust compliance. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that embeds regulatory compliance into the core of the innovation process. This involves establishing clear internal policies that mandate early-stage regulatory impact assessments for all new projects. Cross-functional collaboration between R&D, legal, compliance, and relevant business units is crucial. When faced with uncertainty regarding regulatory requirements, seeking expert legal counsel and engaging with regulatory bodies where appropriate should be standard practice. This proactive, integrated approach ensures that innovation is not only technically sound, but also legally and ethically defensible. Question 14. Assessment of how an applied materials engineer should manage the disclosure of proprietary semiconductor manufacturing techniques during the due diligence phase of potential acquisition by a foreign entity, ensuring compliance with U.S. intellectual property laws and internal company policies. Option A. Share general descriptions of manufacturing capabilities, but withhold specific technical details, relying on verbal assurances of confidentiality from the acquiring entity's representatives. Option B. Disclose detailed technical blueprints and process parameters only after a robust non-disclosure agreement (NDA) is executed, and access is strictly limited to essential personnel on a need-to-know basis, with all disclosures documented. Option C. Refuse to disclose any proprietary manufacturing techniques, citing general confidentiality concerns, even after an NDA has been signed, to prevent any potential risk of information leakage. Option D. Provide all requested technical documentation immediately to facilitate a swift acquisition, assuming the acquiring entity will act ethically and responsibly with the information. The correct answer is B. Disclose detailed technical blueprints and process parameters only after a robust non-disclosure agreement (NDA) is executed, and access is strictly limited to essential personnel on a need-to-know basis, with all disclosures documented. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an applied materials employee regarding the handling of sensitive intellectual property (IP) during a potential acquisition. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's need to protect its proprietary information with the legal and ethical obligations during a due diligence process. Mismanagement of this information could lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of competitive advantage for applied materials. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations and internal policies while facilitating the acquisition process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to applied materials' established IP protection protocols and relevant U.S. regulations governing trade secrets and confidential information. This means ensuring that any disclosure of IP during due diligence is done only after appropriate confidentiality agreements (NDA) are in place, and that access is limited to a need-to-know basis for the acquiring entity's representatives. All disclosures must be meticulously documented. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal framework designed to protect trade secrets under statutes like the Defend Trade Secrets Act (DTSA) and state-level trade secret laws, as well as contractual obligations. It upholds the ethical duty of care owed to applied materials and its shareholders to safeguard valuable assets. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves sharing detailed technical specifications and proprietary manufacturing processes without first executing a comprehensive NDA is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate the principles of trade secret protection, potentially exposing applied materials to misappropriation claims and rendering its IP unprotected. Another incorrect approach would be to delay or refuse all IP disclosures, even after NDAs are signed, citing general confidentiality concerns without specific justification. A caution is warranted. An outright refusal without a valid, legally defensible reason e.g. the information is not relevant to the acquisition or poses an undue risk, could be seen as obstructionist, potentially violating contractual obligations related to the acquisition process and hindering legitimate due diligence. Finally, an approach that relies on informal verbal assurances of confidentiality from the acquiring party's representatives, without formal, legally binding documentation, is also a critical failure. Verbal agreements are notoriously difficult to enforce and do not provide the robust legal protection required for sensitive IP, leaving applied materials vulnerable to breaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Applied Materials should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes a thorough understanding of internal IP policies and relevant U.S. legal frameworks. When faced with a situation involving IP disclosure for an acquisition, the process should involve 1. Consulting with the legal department to ensure all necessary confidentiality agreements are in place and reviewed. 2. Identifying precisely what IP is relevant to the due diligence and the acquisition scope. 3. Limiting disclosure to only that identified IP and only to authorized personnel on the acquiring side. 4. Maintaining meticulous records of all disclosures. 5. Escalating any ambiguities or potential risks to senior management and legal counsel. This systematic approach ensures compliance, mitigates risk, and upholds professional integrity. Question 15. Which approach would be most effective for Applied Materials to ensure compliance with global data privacy regulations when collecting and utilizing customer data for product improvement initiatives? Option A. Relying solely on data anonymization techniques without verifying their effectiveness against potential re-identification risks. Option B. Implementing a comprehensive data governance program that prioritizes explicit customer consent, data minimization, and robust security protocols, while ensuring transparency about data usage. Option C. Assuming that general terms of service implicitly grant consent for all forms of customer data utilization for product development. Option D. Focusing primarily on internal data security measures, without establishing clear procedures for handling customer data subject rights. The correct answer is B. Implementing a comprehensive data governance program that prioritizes explicit customer consent, data minimization, and robust security protocols, while ensuring transparency about data usage. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Applied Materials, as a global technology company, operates under a complex web of international regulations concerning data privacy and security. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to leverage customer data for product improvement and innovation with the stringent legal obligations to protect that data. A failure to comply can result in significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests ethically and legally. The correct approach involves proactively establishing a robust data governance framework that aligns with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and other relevant data privacy laws. This framework should include clear policies for data collection, processing, storage, and deletion, with an emphasis on obtaining explicit consent where required and implementing strong security measures. By prioritizing transparency with customers about data usage and providing them with control over their information, Applied Materials demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical data handling, thereby mitigating legal risks and fostering trust. An incorrect approach that involves broadly interpreting consent to include implied agreement for data usage for product development would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate the principles of explicit consent mandated by regulations like GDPR, which require clear, affirmative action from individuals to agree to data processing. Another incorrect approach, such as anonymizing data without fully understanding the potential for re-identification, poses a substantial risk of unintentional data breaches and noncompliance with data protection laws that require robust de-identification techniques. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on internal data security measures without addressing the legal requirements for data subject rights, like the right to access or erasure, would also be a failure, as it overlooks crucial aspects of data protection legislation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable data privacy regulations. This involves consulting legal counsel and data privacy experts to interpret these laws in the context of Applied Materials business operations. The framework should then prioritize a risk-based approach, identifying potential areas of non-compliance and implementing controls to mitigate those risks. Continuous monitoring and auditing of data handling practices are essential to ensure ongoing adherence to legal requirements and ethical standards. Question 16. Implementation of a new business partnership opportunity for Applied Materials arises, which involves a company where a close personal friend of an Applied Materials employee holds a significant leadership position. The employee believes their friend's influence within that company is minimal and that the partnership would be beneficial for Applied Materials, but they are unsure if this situation constitutes a reportable conflict of interest according to Applied Materials' internal policies. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Applied Materials employee? Option A. Discuss the situation informally with a trusted colleague to gauge their opinion before deciding whether to disclose. Option B. Proceed with evaluating the business partnership opportunity, assuming the personal relationship is not significant enough to influence business decisions. Option C. Delay any disclosure until the partnership is further along in negotiations to avoid unnecessary complications. Option D. Proactively disclose the potential conflict of interest to their direct manager and the company's ethics compliance department, seeking guidance on how to proceed. The correct answer is D. Proactively disclose the potential conflict of interest to their direct manager and the company's ethics compliance department, seeking guidance on how to proceed. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the ethical and regulatory obligations of employees at Applied Materials when encountering potential conflicts of interest. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's need for transparency and adherence to its code of conduct with an employee's personal relationships and potential business dealings. Navigating this requires a nuanced understanding of Applied Materials' internal policies and relevant ethical guidelines, demanding careful judgment to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, which can erode trust and lead to regulatory scrutiny. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal authority at Applied Materials, as outlined in the company's code of conduct and ethics policies. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and adherence to regulatory frameworks governing corporate behavior and employee conduct. By initiating a dialogue and seeking guidance, the employee upholds their ethical responsibility to prevent potential conflicts from influencing business decisions, thereby safeguarding Applied Materials' integrity and reputation. This aligns with the principle of acting in the best interest of the company and avoiding situations that could compromise objectivity. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the business opportunity without disclosure is professionally unacceptable because it violates the fundamental principle of transparency and the explicit requirements of Applied Materials' Code of Conduct regarding conflicts of interest. This failure to disclose creates a direct risk of actual or perceived bias, potentially leading to decisions that are not solely based on the company's best interests. It also exposes Applied Materials to regulatory noncompliance and reputational damage. Assuming the personal relationship is purely social and unrelated to business decisions is also an incorrect approach. While the intent may be benign, the potential for the relationship to influence professional judgment, even indirectly, remains. The ethical obligation is to disclose any situation that could present a conflict, not just those that are definitively proven to do so. This approach ignores the proactive and preventative nature of conflict of interest policies. Seeking advice from a colleague outside of the designated reporting structure for conflict of interest matters is an incorrect approach. While collegial advice can be helpful in many situations, for matters of ethical and regulatory compliance, it is crucial to follow the established internal procedures. Relying on informal advice can lead to misinterpretations of policy or a lack of proper documentation and oversight, which are essential for demonstrating due diligence and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Applied Materials should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the company's code of conduct and ethical guidelines. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the process should involve 1. Identifying the potential conflict. Recognize any situation where personal interests could interfere with professional duties. 2. Consulting internal policies. Review Applied Materials' specific policies on conflicts of interest and disclosure. 3. Proactive disclosure. Report the potential conflict to the designated authority, e.g., Manager, Ethics Office, as soon as it is identified. 4. Seeking guidance. Follow the company's recommended procedures for managing or resolving the conflict. This systematic approach ensures that all actions are transparent, compliant, and in the best interest of Applied Materials. Question 17. The efficiency study reveals a potential overstatement of inventory valuation at a key Applied Materials manufacturing facility. This finding, if confirmed and deemed material, could impact the company's reported cost of goods sold and net income for the current fiscal quarter. Which of the following actions should Applied Materials management take first? Option A. Immediately issue a press release to inform investors about the potential inventory overstatement and its possible financial impact. Option B. Conduct a detailed internal investigation with the finance and legal departments to assess the materiality and accounting implications of the study's findings. Option C. Instruct the facility's management to adjust inventory records to reflect the study's findings without further review. Option D. Delay any public disclosure until the next scheduled quarterly earnings report to avoid market volatility. The correct answer is A. Immediately issue a press release to inform investors about the potential inventory overstatement and its possible financial impact. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Applied Materials, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent regulatory requirements regarding financial reporting and disclosure. The efficiency study's findings, if material, could impact the company's financial statements and investor confidence. Navigating the disclosure of such findings requires a delicate balance between timely reporting, accuracy, and compliance with securities laws and internal policies. The pressure to present a positive financial outlook must not override the obligation to provide truthful and complete information to stakeholders. The correct approach involves a thorough internal review and consultation with legal and compliance departments before any external disclosure. This ensures that the findings are accurately assessed for materiality, the appropriate accounting standards are applied, and the disclosure is made in accordance with all applicable regulations, such as those enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, in the U.S. This methodical process safeguards the integrity of Applied Materials' financial reporting and upholds its fiduciary duty to investors. An incorrect approach would be to immediately disclose the study's findings without proper vetting. This could lead to premature or inaccurate statements, potentially violating SEC regulations on disclosure of material non-public information or causing market confusion. Another incorrect approach would be to suppress or significantly downplay the findings to avoid negative publicity or impact on stock price. This would constitute a breach of ethical conduct and potentially violate anti-fraud provisions of securities laws, which prohibit misleading statements or omissions of material facts. Failing to consult with legal and compliance teams before making any public statements about the study's implications is also a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it bypasses essential checks and balances designed to ensure compliance. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical integrity. This involves 1. Understanding the potential impact of new information. 2. Consulting with relevant internal stakeholders, legal, compliance, finance. 3. Assessing materiality against established criteria. 4. Preparing disclosures in accordance with applicable regulations and company policy. And 5. Ensuring timely and accurate communication to the market. Question 18. During the evaluation of new marketing collateral for Applied Materials' latest semiconductor manufacturing equipment, the marketing team presents compelling claims about enhanced yield and reduced processing times. The legal and compliance department is tasked with reviewing these claims. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance? Option A. Rely on the sales team's anecdotal evidence and customer feedback to validate the claims, as they are closest to the market and understand customer expectations. Option B. Expedite the approval process to gain a competitive advantage, focusing primarily on the persuasive impact of the language used in the collateral. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the marketing materials, verifying all performance claims against technical specifications, test data, and relevant regulatory guidelines to ensure accuracy and prevent misleading statements. Option D. Approve the marketing materials if the claims are generally perceived as positive and align with industry aspirations, assuming competitors make similar statements. The correct answer is D. Approve the marketing materials if the claims are generally perceived as positive and align with industry aspirations, assuming competitors make similar statements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to promote its products and the regulatory obligation to ensure that marketing materials are accurate, not misleading, and comply with specific industry standards. Applied Materials, as a company operating in a regulated sector, must navigate this tension carefully. The professional challenge lies in balancing aggressive marketing strategies with the imperative of regulatory adherence, which protects consumers and maintains market integrity. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all marketing materials by the legal and compliance departments to ensure they align with the specific regulatory framework governing the industry. This process should verify that claims made about product performance, capabilities, and benefits are substantiated by evidence and do not overstate or misrepresent the product's actual attributes. This adherence to regulatory standards is crucial for preventing potential fines, reputational damage, and legal challenges. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices and consumer protection, which are foundational principles in regulated industries. An incorrect approach of approving marketing materials solely based on their persuasive power, without rigorous compliance checks, would lead to significant regulatory failures. This could result in violations of advertising standards, potentially misleading customers about product efficacy or safety, and incurring penalties from regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach, such as relying on the sales team's subjective assessment of claims without independent verification, bypasses essential oversight and increases the risk of noncompliance. A third incorrect approach, which is to assume that if competitors are making similar claims, then Applied Materials can too, ignores the possibility that competitors may also be in violation, or that the specific regulatory nuances applicable to Applied Materials might differ. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a proactive and systematic approach to regulatory compliance. This involves establishing clear internal policies and procedures for marketing material review ensuring that all relevant personnel are trained on these policies and the applicable regulations, and fostering a culture where compliance is seen as an integral part of business operations, not an impediment. When in doubt, seeking expert legal and compliance advice is paramount. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a regulatory audit concerning the handling of sensitive customer data by Applied Materials R&D division. A critical piece of information needed for an upcoming product development milestone is currently held by a third-party vendor, and the standard data transfer protocol has been temporarily suspended due to a technical issue. The R&D team lead is under pressure to obtain this data immediately to avoid project delays. What is the most appropriate course of action for the R&D team lead at Applied Materials? Option A. Immediately contact the Applied Materials legal and compliance departments to explain the situation and seek guidance on an expedited, compliant method for data acquisition. Option B. Instruct a junior team member to attempt to bypass the suspended protocol by accessing the vendor's system directly, as they may have the technical skills to resolve the issue quickly. Option C. Initiate an informal request to the third-party vendor, emphasizing the urgency and requesting the data be sent via an unsecured email attachment, as this is the fastest way to receive it. Option D. Proceed with the data transfer using an older, less secure protocol that is still functional, assuming the risk of a data breach is low given the temporary nature of the issue. The correct answer is C. Initiate an informal request to the third-party vendor, emphasizing the urgency and requesting the data be sent via an unsecured email attachment, as this is the fastest way to receive it. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Applied Materials to balance the immediate need for information with the imperative of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The pressure to obtain data quickly can lead to shortcuts that violate established protocols, potentially exposing the company to legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of trust from regulatory bodies. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions are not only effective, but also legally sound and ethically defensible. The correct approach involves proactively seeking guidance from the legal and compliance departments. This is the most professionally sound strategy because it directly addresses the potential regulatory and legal implications of the situation. By engaging these specialized departments, the individual ensures that any actions taken are in full accordance with the relevant regulatory framework and internal policies of Applied Materials. This approach demonstrates a commitment to compliance, risk mitigation, and responsible data handling, which are paramount in a regulated industry. It leverages the expertise of those responsible for interpreting and enforcing these regulations, thereby minimizing the risk of inadvertent violations. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the data acquisition without consulting the legal and compliance teams. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the established channels for ensuring regulatory adherence. Such an action could lead to the acquisition of data in a manner that violates privacy laws, intellectual property rights, or other applicable regulations, resulting in significant penalties for Applied Materials. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the advice of a colleague who may not have the specific expertise in regulatory compliance or legal matters. While well-intentioned, this can lead to misinterpretations of regulations or internal policies, creating a false sense of security while still exposing the company to risk. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic process. First, identify the potential regulatory implications of the situation. Second, consult the appropriate internal resources, such as the legal and compliance departments, to understand the specific requirements and limitations. Third, document all communications and decisions made. Finally, act only after receiving clear guidance that aligns with the company's regulatory obligations and ethical standards. Question 20. Performance analysis shows that a senior engineer at Applied Materials has learned about a significant technological breakthrough that is expected to substantially impact the company's market position. This breakthrough has not yet been announced publicly. The engineer is considering discussing this development with colleagues in the sales department to help them prepare for future customer interactions. What is the most appropriate course of action for the engineer to take, adhering strictly to U.S. securities regulations and Applied Materials' internal compliance policies? Option A. Verify the public availability of the information through official applied materials, investor relations channels, or press releases before discussing it with anyone. Option B. Assume the information is common knowledge within the engineering department and therefore permissible to discuss broadly. Option C. Discuss the information with sales colleagues, as they have a legitimate business need to understand future product developments. Option D. Share the information with external vendors who are key partners to ensure they are aware of applied materials' upcoming advancements. The correct answer is A. Verify the public availability of the information through official applied materials, investor relations channels, or press releases before discussing it with anyone. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Applied Materials regarding the handling of potentially material non-public information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to share information for legitimate business purposes with the strict prohibition against insider trading. Employees are entrusted with sensitive data, and a misstep can lead to severe legal and reputational consequences for both the individual and Applied Materials. Careful judgment is required to discern when information is truly public and when it remains confidential and material. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves verifying the public availability of the information through official channels before discussing it. This aligns with regulatory frameworks such as the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 in the U.S., which prohibits trading on material non-public information. By consulting Applied Materials investor relations or official press releases, an employee ensures that any discussion of the information is based on data that is accessible to the general investing public. This prevents the inadvertent disclosure or use of insider information, thereby upholding ethical standards and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Discussing the information with colleagues in other departments who are not directly involved in the project, even with a general understanding of confidentiality, poses a significant risk. This action could lead to the information spreading beyond those with a legitimate need to know, increasing the likelihood of it becoming selectively disclosed rather than truly public. This violates the principle of fair disclosure mandated by securities regulations, which aim to ensure all investors have access to the same information simultaneously. Sharing the information with external vendors or partners without explicit authorization from Applied Materials' legal or investor relations department is also a critical failure. Such disclosures, even if intended for business development, can be construed as selective disclosure of material non-public information, leading to insider trading violations. The company has a responsibility to control the dissemination of such information to prevent market manipulation and ensure a level playing field for all investors. Assuming the information is common knowledge within the company without formal verification is a dangerous assumption. What might seem like common knowledge to a few individuals could still be considered material non-public information by regulatory bodies if it has not been officially disseminated to the public. This approach bypasses the necessary due diligence required to confirm public availability and risks violating insider trading rules. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Applied Materials should adopt a when in doubt, don't mentality regarding potentially material non-public information. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying information that could be considered material and non-public. 2. Consulting internal policies and compliance guidelines regarding information handling. 3. Verifying the public status of the information through official company channels, e.g., investor relations, SEC filings, official press releases. 4. Seeking guidance from the compliance department or legal counsel if there is any ambiguity. 5. Only discussing or acting upon information once its public availability has been confirmed.